Hi, Maulik. My name
Hi.
is Micah. I'm one of the hosts at Urban Nation, and I'm really excited to kind of dive into just your work in the series for Audible, and I'm really excited to speak with you.
I'm excited to speak with you as well. Thank you for having me on.
Of course. So just jumping right in, what was your kind of thought process when you were creating, the storyline behind this series and this podcast?
Yeah, I would say there's like a few things going on. I would say one, I also thought it'd be great to write a show around a Indian American family run business.
Hmm.
And, I feel like we all kind of know about convenience stores and Dunkin' Donuts and Subway sandwiches and these things that are sort of present in the culture, but it always boggles my mind that most people don't know about Patel motels. I have a friend who's a sociology professor who'd written a sociology book called Life Behind the Lobby, which is about Patel motels. There's a documentary at Tribeca Film Festival right now about Patel motels, and yet when you talk to people, most people don't really know this exists. And so I was like, this could be really interesting. I'm Gujarati. I'm not a Patel, but I grew up around a lot of Patels who own motels, and so I just thought, what a great world to set a series in. And then I was a kid who grew up in the Midwest and then in Tampa, Florida. And Tampa is not necessarily like a small town, but it had a small town feel when I was growing up, where it was not the easiest to be gay or brown in those situations. So I'm always like kind of interested in writing about that and like what happens with the kid who had to get out of Dodge, like just could not wait to leave his town, has to go back and is forced to stay there. And then this idea of like, how do you raise the stakes of that?
Yeah.
So, what if the person that you really need to reconcile with passes away? And that's kind of where the idea for a murder mystery came in, and then just all these kind of elements combined of like a Patel Motel and a murder mystery, and this Agatha Christie world kind of just like materialized of like a whodunit and all the people that might be at the motel. And so yeah, that's kind of where the impetus for the show came from.
Yeah, and it's interesting because it's set in Montana. And one of the things kind of I was thinking is you don't always hear of a lot of Indian Americans that grow up in Montana. You tend to hear of like the major hotspots, California, New Jersey, Texas, you know what I mean? So what made you kind of decide on Montana? Was there a specific reasoning behind that as part of his journey of kind of coming back home?
Yeah, well, when I was very young, I lived in Ohio and Indiana, and certainly there were motels around us then. Early on, I was working with a writer friend who had grown up in Montana, and she told me this amazing story about how she lived in this tiny little town in Montana, and she said that there was one Chinese restaurant that was owned by like a Chinese family, and everybody else there was white. And I was like, oh, that is again like upping the stakes. Like I was like that, yeah, like rural Montana would be an amazing place to set this show because the truth is like we do exist in these places. People just don't talk about it so much, and so that's kind of where the idea for Montana came from. And then I just think a murder mystery in Montana is so ripe for it's such a ripe setting for a good murder mystery.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, you always see of these like murder mysteries in beach towns and like, down south, but you kind of never see it sometimes in the Midwest. And I feel like it's a great setting for a murder mystery, especially in this type of environment that you've created with the storyline. And I know that you brought up, Agatha Christie's whodunit type of inspiration. What inspiration did you take from her writing to kind of create into this world that you were making?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing was kind of like this idea that everybody's a suspect, which I think plays into a lot of the Agatha Christie kind of oeuvre of work. It's like this idea that there's a detective that's trying to figure out who of many suspects, all of whom have a personal relationship with
Yeah.
the deceased, could be. But we also looked at, shows like or movies like Knives Out, and I feel like now there's kind of so many things in that zeitgeist, but I think Agatha Christie is kind of like a name that we all sort of know and think of. But the biggest piece I would say was this idea that any one of the characters in this town could have been responsible for this murder, and we're going to have little clues along the way that are going to make us suspect various people at different points in the series.
Talking about the people, who was your
Yeah.
favorite character that you created? What was your favorite like character that you made as you were writing out the storyline?
Oh my gosh, I am so bad at favorites. I mean, I could tell you like every single one of these characters. It's so interesting because they all are very flawed and they all have suspicious motives at various points throughout the show. And yet I think they're all characters that I sort of fell in love with. And especially when we got into casting and got the amazing talent that are like behind these voices that just really lifted the script off the page. So I don't know if I have a favorite. I think they each also, have like a an important function in the show. And when you ask that question, one of the things that popped out to me is Piyush, who's kind of got this heart of gold. Not that it doesn't make him suspicious, but I think he's this character that a lot of people will fall in love with early on, and maybe they'll be surprised whether or not they should have.
That's interesting. As you said, casting really brought those, emotions into the characters and behind their voices, etc. What was casting like? And were you kind of a part of the casting? And how was that experience for you, having written and also starring in the series?
Yeah, no, I was 100% part of the casting and wore a producer hat on the show as well. And for most of these folks, we made like a few little lists and we are like, who do we want? And then we reached out to them, and most people said yes, which was kind of incredible. And some of them are friends or people that I've worked with before. Some were not. We were super excited to get pretty much like every person. But I also, everyone that I got to work with on the show in that capacity are people that I'm fans of, whether or not I'm their friend, and so having them be a part of the show was kind of like a dream come true. I mean, to get to record with Margot Martindale and Richard Kind and Murray Bartlett, who I've actually known for I think like 20 some years, but we've never actually worked together. So to get to have him play my fiance was like so much fun. And Purna and Karan, I'm like huge fans of and have known for a long time. And I thought they just like really nailed it and brought so much to these roles.
What is the hardest part of like voice acting? Because I've always wondered this, like, how do you kind of bring the emotions to your voice when you know that, people aren't really necessarily seeing your face or your acting on screen? How do you kind of bring those emotions into narration?
Yeah, I think that you kind of nailed it. Like one of the things that is challenging about it is the awareness that there's this technical machine, and you're really hearing a director. We recorded everybody individually, so I was reading with people, but also kind of directing them. And so the idea that you're hearing someone's voice in your head and you're having to respond and react, and like a facial reaction isn't going to tell the story. And so, but then also like you can't really overdo it with the voice either. You have to play honestly, because people are listening in a very, when you listen to an audio series, I imagine people are listening to this with, I listen to them anyway with like headphones on, and you're hearing a lot of nuance. And if something's not ringing true, you're going to know it. You're going to know it right away. So I would say like that's one of the challenges. And then another challenge is just that these days are, like 6 to 8 hour days of just like you in front of a microphone. And by the end of the day, it can start to feel like the words are swimming on the page a little bit. And like you're very aware of your own voice in your head. But in the end, I think that acting is acting, and we cast great actors, not really thinking like, hey, I've done a lot of voiceover. It was more just like, are these great actors? And that was the most important part of it, I would say.
Yeah, and I totally understand what you're saying, where it's like if you're speaking into a microphone for 8 hours, at the end of the 8 hours, you're like, oh, now I don't really know where my brain was and how do I get back into this character, especially because you might not necessarily have the same breaks that you do when you're like acting on screen. And so that's really interesting to kind of hear from your perspective of what voice narration and acting really includes from, a creative standpoint as well.
Yeah, and like on a technical level, it's also there is a microphone there, and so you have to be careful about like not popping your P's or blowing too hard on the microphone, and you're pretty much having to stand relatively still because the microphone catches like big movements and stuff like that. So there is just the sort of exhaustion of sort of just it's mouth to microphone kind of like hour on hour.
Yeah, I think I
Not
would
like, solving world peace or something. So I don't mean to make it like it's not like the hardest job in the world.
no, but I totally get that. I think I would be very like anxiously stressed out standing there trying to make sure that my, peas aren't popping or that, by accident, if I hiccup, like that would start all over again. I totally understand that.
That's a thing too. Like post lunch, people's stomachs start gurgling. That's a thing
Yeah.
too.
No, I think that would be a very stressful thing maintain. So I totally understand that because sometimes when you're on camera, those things can like be edited out or just sort of, created under a certain level of production. But when you're doing voice narration, everything is picked up with the microphone. So that's very interesting to hear, from your perspective, especially like the after lunch thing is very true. I think. But yeah, I'm really excited for people to listen to the whole 10 episodes. I think it's a really interesting concept. When I was first like researching it to speak with you, and just listening to some of the excerpts, it's a really well done project and really interesting to see, especially, as a first generation South Asian in the US. And I think it's a really cool project that you've created. So I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with me.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. I'm excited for folks to listen to it all the way through. It's at its core, it was like we wanted to create a show about a complicated Indian American family in a setting that we haven't really seen, and doing things that we haven't gotten, like we don't get to see Indian American families sort of behave in this way that often. And so I think it's exciting and fun. And the murder mystery is, I think people will be surprised and have lots of twists and turns along the way.